Very important part of discipleship. You have to be inspired. You have to sense the call to ministry in some way, if God is calling you to preach in that way. Discipleship involves instruction. There are things you learn. It may involve correction if you need correction. One of the powerful parts of discipleship, someone who wants to do a work for God, you need to get involved in ministry in some way. I have disciples, they get stirred at a conference, discipleship class, whatever it might be. Pastor, I want to do something for God. I feel called. What should I do? You should get involved. You cannot be a disciple if you're not involved in ministry in some way, and you need to work with people, because it is working with people that you learn lessons. There's nothing like working with people to learn lessons about ministry and people and learn about yourself. But here's the point that I want to make as it concerns Asia. Sometimes our involvement will give you direction for future ministry. Perth, West Australia, the church that Lisa and I were originally sent out of. Australia is an extremely multicultural society. It is made up of many immigrants. I told you years ago when Lisa and I were pastoring in Melbourne, the area of Footscray, back then I think we had 35 nationalities. And I'm not talking about people who say, I have 132nd Cherokee blood. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people directly from different nations. So what happened in the church in Perth, at that time it was located in an area called Scarborough, near the beach, that Asians started getting saved. This is often what happens. You'll have waves of different nationalities or cultures that come through at any given time. Asians started getting saved in the church. Two couples in the church, Brian and Angie Roenfeld. They began following up on Asians, if they were from China, Indonesia, wherever they were from, various places. They started following up on them, forming relationships with them, working with them, and then out of that, they started doing outreaches to reach more Asians in different ways. Another couple, it's actually Brian's brother-in-law and sister, Bob and Megan Matthews. Another couple, Trevor and Priscilla Fong. He was my roommate before I got married. These were three couples that all got involved with Asians. They were simply following up, but there was an entire group. We have some pictures here, and you'll see on the left, the top row in the center, that's Brian Roenfeld. Next to that is his brother-in-law, Bob Matthews. Bottom left, that is Trevor Fong, used to be my roommate. And these are some of the Asian converts that God originally was saving. The picture on the right, there are the Matthews and the Roenfelds with some Asian converts. So they simply started working, because everybody who gets saved needs someone to befriend them. But out of that, they started getting a heart for Asians, for Chinese people, Malaysian people, whatever nationality they were, and they wanted to reach them. 1991, both the Roenfelds and the Matthews, they got jobs teaching English in the city of Guangzhou. Guangzhou is the first city when you cross from Macau. It's the closest city to, or not Macau, rather Hong Kong. It's the closest city in mainland China. And so they got jobs. Again, how can you operate in a nation that is communist, anti-Christian? You maneuver. Remember, wise as serpents. So they got jobs teaching English. Have a photo now. There's Brian and Angie at the top. These are some of their first converts that they got. So now they're teaching English, but using English as a way to preach the gospel now to communist Chinese. They got a group of converts. You see some of them there. They were there for 1 year only, and then Brian's contract to teach was canceled. I don't remember if that was actually because of his gospel work, but nonetheless, so this was his first foray into an Asian nation. It was in Guangzhou. Another Australian couple took over for a short time, and then ultimately a couple from Holland, Rene Brabants and his wife, took over that work that had been started initially by the Roenfelds and did a good job. The Brabants got a good solid group of people together in Guangzhou. It was small, but it was solid. Then another couple ultimately came and took over. Hank and Sanita Bruce came from Holland, and they took that church over in Guangzhou. And now that God began to really do something good, the church in Guangzhou began to do well. Someone from an area called Dongguan came through, I don't remember if they met him on the street or if it was a contact or a friend of someone in Guangzhou, but they came from Dongguan, which was 45 minutes away, and they got saved. And so now began asking, would you come to Dongguan and preach to my family and my friends? And so for quite some time, the Bruces were ministering in 2 churches at the same time. He would minister several times a week in Guangzhou. He would minister also in Dongguan. And in both cities, they began to grow and began to do well. Eventually, you can't do that forever. And another couple, Franz Smits and his wife, came and took the church in Dongguan. But it was in Guangzhou, that original church that the Roenfelds had pioneered. That is where our work in China really began to take off. Other people were pioneering, they were plowing, but in Guangzhou, this Dutch couple, they did very, very good. And the most important part of them being there, everywhere we go to start a work, we are not there just to get people saved. We are not there just to build a church. We're there to make disciples. And that is especially, making disciples is the real key to reaching any nation, because that is ultimately the answer. If China has over 1 billion people, it would be impossible for us to send enough missionaries to reach the whole nation. What really has to happen, to reach the entire nation, you have to have Chinese disciples, and then, of course, looking ahead, using common sense, in any Muslim, communist, or Hindu nation, probably the open door won't stay open forever. Governments change, they crack down. So if you're not making disciples, then your work has the potential of falling apart. Bert and Gerda Flederes, they came and took the church from the Bruces and really did a fine job of making disciples. They started planting churches, and that was very powerful, planting the first Chinese couples out. That is an amazing work. Bart and Wilma Koiker, another Dutch couple, came and took over from the Fledereses. And then in America, Mark and Diana Crumpler, they went to China several times as well. So here's a lesson that I want to give you. That is, we must respond to open doors. So we have, and again, I'm weaving through all of these stories. How do we get churches in nations? That can be God speaks. God told Lisa and I told me to go to South Africa. That's one way. You have people that have a natural burden. I have family. I have a passport. I always wanted to go. But one of the things that happens is that in different nations, doors swing open. Doors that are shut because of law, because of politics, communism, religion, Islam or Hinduism, they shut doors. They keep Christianity out, but then politics change. the door opens, we must respond when God opens the door. 1 Corinthians 16:9.
For a great and effective door has opened to me, and there are many adversaries.
Okay, Paul is giving his approach to ministry. He says there's a great opportunity, an effectual or an effective door has been opened. So we operate through the principle of open doors. And that is especially true when you have a nation that was closed. When it opens, God requires us, we must respond to that. And we have to do it quickly because, again, common sense tells you doors that are open will not stay open forever. So the original works that I've described to you now, everyone who went into China up to this point, they all were operating in an atmosphere of strict control. This is different. Remember, wise as serpents. For some men, they chafe at this. They hate this aspect. In a communist nation, in a Hindu and a Muslim nation, it is not wise to approach preaching the gospel exactly like you do in America. In America, we're going to boldly preach. If they come and arrest us, we'll take them to court. We'll fight. By golly, this is our rights. That's not how it operates there. And so they teach English clubs. They have different methods to preach, but that was generally in an atmosphere of strict control, and you are very wise and aware of the government being against you. But then China changed. China's doors began to open. They relaxed their stance. Up until China was a closed nation, the Great Wall of China. That was actually symbolic. It's not just history. That was their symbolic stance towards outsiders. They fear outsiders. Xenophobia, the fear of outsiders is how they operated. And so now the doors open. They relaxed this. As soon as we saw that the doors were open, we started sending in workers rapidly, multiples in the same conference, because we recognized it won't stay open. Let's hit it now. So what happened is now we could open new ground, new cities, new provinces, and we could make disciples in various different places. Now, I'm not going to, please, if you're watching this and you were a missionary that labored there, I'm not naming names deliberately because there are workers that want to keep going back and preaching, and I'm not going to show you modern photos. There are people right now, it would not be healthy for them if I show you all the photos and someday we let the communist police be able to track down everybody that is there. But I recognize there were workers, many workers from the United States, from England, from Australia, from Holland. There were people that we were sending as many as possible, actually as fast as possible, and they, with the goal of making disciples. A wise missionary is one who knows, I am here. I've got to make disciples because I might not be here forever. Doors that were open, then later on they started swinging shut again. In various places, the government began to crack down. And this is what would happen. In many of our places, they may have met in a dozen different church buildings because they would rent one, the police would finally catch on, come and crack down on them. And it is so densely packed, they would move a distance away, rent again until the police would crack down. They just kept moving. And there are churches they've probably had a dozen buildings or even more because of that. So what started happening is they would crack down. Some of our missionaries got deported. As they would get deported Fortunately, disciples were being made, whether that was in their church or the main church in Guangzhou, Dongguan, had made disciples. And so Chinese workers started taking over these established churches. And then in COVID, COVID was very frightening for the missionaries. We had to pay a lot of money to get our missionaries out as quickly as possible. COVID was weird for us in China. They were literally the police would come and put locks on the outside of somebody's apartment and lock them in. And so the ability to get food, Chinese people, now the xenophobia comes. In China, they were telling them it was the foreigners who brought COVID. I know some of you know where it really came from, but they said it was the foreigners, so who are they going to give food? Not foreigners. So it's actually very dangerous. Most of our missionaries had to leave during the COVID era. There were a few that were able to hold on. The Barchams were back by that time. He's a dentist, so he had a legitimate job and a reason to be there, but ultimately they had to leave anyway. So the Chinese were taking over. Some of the missionaries that left, there were not enough disciples, Chinese disciples, to take all the churches. So some of the pastors for several years kept on meeting with their church over Zoom. They would get up, whatever the time difference, they would preach over Zoom, and these people would watch them. But now what's happening? The door is swinging open again. And we are currently, you saw in the last conference, we sent 3 workers because I believe in the principle of open doors. We are going to send as many as we can, as fast as we can, knowing that it won't stay open. And hopefully every one of those men will make disciples, because that's how we're going to reach China. Right now, there are 24 churches in China, and 20 out of 24 are pastored by Chinese couples. And so that is a wonderful thing. Thank God. Let's talk about Malaysia. In Malaysia, we originally did some crusades, many in Africa, India, Malaysia, Philippines. How did we get in originally? We met church pastors and churches from outside of our fellowship. We went and preached for them, trying to get an open door. This is what we did. We have a trumpet report. Here is revival in Malaysia. All those photos that you see, that's not a fellowship church. That was people that we met, and they would go in and did crusades. Joe Campbell had gone in a number of these crusades, and he went into Malaysia working with several existing pastors. I think I have a photo here. Somewhere in there is Joe Campbell preaching. I can't remember which exact photo. Oh, there he is, bottom left corner. I believe that's Joe Campbell preaching. And so ultimately God spoke to Joe Campbell, you're going to be in Malaysia. And Joe and Connie Campbell did wind up going to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Malaysia is a Muslim nation. And we have a photo of them there. This is the work. Now you see Petaling Jaya is the neighborhood in Kuala Lumpur metro area. And so Joe is a disciple maker. He was preaching, getting converts, making disciples. He's challenging culture, and that is where our work in Malaysia began. We were working with other pastors, but ultimately our pastors have to go and to establish and set the pattern for others to follow. Because of the split, the rebellion of 1990, that's our next lesson we're going to look at. Joe had to leave prematurely, had to leave Kuala Lumpur, come back to rescue the church in Chandler. And so he nationalized that work in Malaysia. We now have 5 churches in Malaysia, and I'm going to show you a photo. Remember I talked about involvement, Trevor and Priscilla Fong, those earlier photos from the church in Scarborough in Perth, West Australia, working with Asians. Trevor and Priscilla Fong are in Malaysia today. They're preaching the gospel. They have been there a number of days. Indonesia. 1991, the Roenfelds. So the Roenfelds went, they were deported from China, and now he has a heart for Asians by working with them. And so the Roenfelds were sent to Jakarta, Indonesia. Indonesia is the second largest, I'm pulling this, it's India, China, and India, China, Indonesia would be the third largest Asian nation in the world, completely Muslim, but the Roenfelds, God bless them, they have a pioneer spirit, and he has a heart for people. They were able to build a work, we've got a photo here, able to build a work of about 100 people by the time that they had to leave. They had numbers of other workers came in from Australia originally. Craig and Helen Newton, these are people that Lisa and I went to church with. This is their work. Craig is in the white shirt in the top left photo there, and then here is the church that they were building there. Another Australian couple, Scott and Anna McLean. They were sent there from, I think, the Bunbury Church. Glenn and Sandra Anderson. They were sent out of Geraldton. Chris and Marcia Razmovsky, Peter and Brenda Cruz, Zach and Zoe Triono. Zoe is the daughter of Peter and Brenda Cruz, and her and her husband are now pastoring that church in Jakarta in Indonesia. Brian and Angie Roenfeld, after going numbers of different places, I'll tell other stories. Today they are in Denpasar on the island of Bali in Indonesia, still doing a work for God. Right now we have 6 churches in the nation of Indonesia. Nepal, the nation of Nepal. My wife's brother, Lisa's brother Carl, in Perth, West Australia, a man came into the church and got saved. He was from Nepal. And later his sister came for a visit, and suddenly from across the Bible study their eyes met, and Carl and Gita fell in love. Carl married a Nepalese girl named Gita. I have a photo. Try the next one, see if I have it. No, I got my photos out of order. I don't know which one that one is. And go one more forward. There you go. That's the photo I was looking for. That is Lisa's brother. Carl. Gita is Nepalese, and these are their 2 children. But because they were saved, here is one of the ways that we get new churches. Now, some of the family are saved in Australia, but they began to pray, God, we need a fellowship church in Nepal. And many times we have churches, this is how they come about. This was true, I told you, in the East Coast, in Massachusetts. Some of those works began because people were praying for the place where they're from. This is what happened. Gita and her family were praying for the work, or there to be a work opened in Nepal, and this is what happened. In a conference, Mike and Yolanda Stamper were very stirred. Again, I'm telling you the different ways that churches come about. Some people, God speaks to them a place. He came to me and said, I am very stirred. He told Pastor Mitchell and myself, I'm stirred, but I have no direction where. I'm willing to go anywhere. And knowing that Gita and the family were interested in there being a church in Nepal, I naturally had a church or an interest as well. And I said, what about Kathmandu, Nepal? And so they responded, and this is exactly what happened. Is Mike and Yolanda Stamper went to Kathmandu, Nepal. They were the first workers there. Go to the next picture. It appears I have them out of order. I think that's actually Indonesia. That's a photo of the Roenfelds. Go to the next one. There we go. Here is early days of the work in Kathmandu, Nepal. I think that is If I remember right, that's the first building. The top left, that's the first building. All of those you see on the front row, those are Gita's family. My sister-in-law's family, that's them on the front row. They now came into the church. They became instrumental. At the bottom left, there is a street outreach that they're doing on the street. Top right, if I remember, that is the second building now. And you can see that God began to do a work there. And this is what happened. Next photo. Here is now, this is the conference in India in 2022. We have 2 different workers. We sent the porters later on. And so now you see our own Paul and Amy Arps are there in the photo. I'm in the middle. And these are all of the delegates from Nepal, different ones. And numbers of those are the family of Gita that originally she prayed. And her and her brother and family were praying for a work in Nepal. And so now you're seeing that God is building a work in Nepal. The nation of Vietnam. In Vietnam, the Roenfelds now, who had been in China, had been in Indonesia. Now in 1996, they were sent to Vietnam, and then their partners in crime, Bob and Megan Matthews, this is family, both couples were sent to Vietnam. And if I remember right, it was Hanoi that they went to. Initially began to make very good impact, but again, this is a communist nation, and so what began to happen is the police, plainclothes police, followed them everywhere they went. I remember a pastor telling me of going to preach for the Roenfelds in the early days, and he said it was like being in a spy movie. Quick, hop on the motorcycle, and they're zooming in and out and going down and running down the alley and then meeting secretly. And so that's wise as serpents. And so, but it finally became, it was impossible for the Roenfelds. Everywhere they went, the police were following them, making it difficult. So after only 6 months of building a work, they got converts, they did a work for God. After only 6 months, the Roenfelds were forced to leave Vietnam and went on to India, which we'll get to in a minute. So now, Westerners, they're very suspicious of. I don't know if you remember this, but we were all amazed when Russia planted a worker into Vietnam, because who helped Vietnam in the war? Russia. So Americans they're suspicious of, even Australians they're suspicious of because they helped in the war. But I remember, like, how smart is God? A work in Russia is able to plant, and he has no problem. So that was quite novel. But then what happened is, from the Philippines, the main church in Mandaluyong, they sent Ramil Cordero and his wife to Hanoi. And very, very interesting, I'm telling you about God who is in charge. We have a photo. I want you to see the next photo. Hopefully I have it in line. If you look at the right, you see 2 young men here. These 2 young men, they are Aussies from the city of Adelaide in Australia. I think they're from the Assembly of God. Somehow, these young men, their church, I don't think, planted missionaries. They wanted to do something for God, and somehow, in their hearts, these 2 brothers moved to Vietnam with no support. We want to do something for God, and they thought, how can we reach Vietnamese in a communist nation? They opened a coffee shop. And so the Corderos met them. You see Boyet, and that's the leader in Philippines, talking to these Aussie brothers. When Ramil went and met them, they offered the use of their coffee shop as an English club. This is a way that to invite outsiders in without saying it's a church. And so God bless these Aussie brothers who were instrumental, giving them a place to evangelize. And that was very powerful. Next photo, they actually this is in their coffee shop, allowing them to meet, and you see what they're really doing. They called it an English club, but they're preaching the gospel. And that was wise as serpents, harmless as doves. I am told that those Aussie brothers were so inspired ultimately at what God was doing in the church through our Filipino brothers that they wound up opening their own church. They're not with us, but God bless them. Thank God for people with hearts for the gospel. And so in Vietnam, like China, the door swung open. And when that happened, we started sending workers in, and the most powerful part is not just having churches. They started making disciples. And Ramil Cordero did an outstanding job in Hanoi, made disciples, and started planting churches, started planting Vietnamese couples into Vietnam to reach them. And ultimately, they have now planted even missionary work. Vietnamese workers are in other nations now, preaching. They're very, very powerful. Have a photo. They nationalized it. And here's a photo. That is Ramil Cordero. This is I think that is their first church building that they got. Let's see, what's the next photo that we have? There's the first baptism. Top left is the very first baptism of the very first Vietnamese converts. Down below, when Pastor Boyette came, they had another baptism. All these people got baptized. Those are Vietnamese converts. We now have 13 churches in Vietnam. Have a next photo. And no, that is new converts class after morning prayer. And one of the things when the Corderos opened, young people, very young nation at that time. And so young people were responding. There is one of their early buildings. God is doing a great work. Next photo. Here is a church. Bottom right is laying hands on Brother Dui and his wife who took over. And they are now the national leaders. They pastor that church. They are the national leaders in Vietnam, which is our ultimate goal. But that door is still open. We are sending workers. We support a work out of Prescott to T.J. Horta and his wife. We support them in the city of Da Nang in Vietnam. India. A man was sent from Kenya to India. He lacked character. He had all kinds of problems that I won't go into. So he had to go back in shame to Kenya. The Roenfelds, for a while there, we didn't play Where's Waldo? We played Where's Brian Roenfeld? He's somewhere in the world. And Brian and Angie, God bless them, they moved around, went to India now. And they went to Aurangabad in India, where this man from Kenya was supposed to be building a church. We have a photo of Brian, and there is Brian. And these are some of the people in Aurangabad. But he discovered, he said, this church is nothing like our fellowship. It was kind of religious people. So he went and scouted the city of Bangalore, that he heard they speak more English there. And he was the first one to scout in the city of Bangalore. Something happened. Joe Campbell was in a restaurant in Malaysia in 1988, and he said all of the waiters were young Indian men, hardworking men from India that had come over for an opportunity. And God did something. He wasn't looking at waiters. He saw the potential. He said, if I had 100 men like that dedicated to the gospel, we could reach India. So God put it in Pastor Campbell's heart, and he said, I want to reach India. Chandler launched the first real full-time work into India. The Roenfelds were only there a short time. His wife was having twin babies and health problems, and they had to leave in a very rapid amount of time. But Ashkar and Linda Gafoor were sent out of the Chandler Conference to the city of Bangalore, where they began to build a good work. Later, Dan and Monica Rubianis took over that work. We have some photos from the early days, and here is various crusade at the top and middle, early outreach on the right, and there is the church on the left. They began to build this work in Bangalore. And then out of India, again, our goal is not simply building churches, it's making disciples, planting churches. From India, they began planting churches. And we have some photos here. More, you see Dad in the middle there with some missionaries and a native Indian worker. There's a march on the top right. Dad preaching in the conference, giving a challenge. Conference in the bottom left and top left. But this was a conference, and they started planting churches. We nationalized the work there, and Paki and Samantha Raj took over there. Now the national leaders in India doing a great job. Missionaries, again, open door. We started sending in missionaries from different nations. It is technically illegal. They have a law. It's against the law to convert a Hindu. This is now a Hindu nation. It's illegal, but we don't say, well, it's illegal, so I guess they all go to hell. Absolutely not. Wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Sometimes there's trouble. You got to be wise about it. But nonetheless, we do that. Have a photo. This is from the conference in 2022 where I preached. And so these are all Indian pastors. Now we have 36 churches in the nation of India right now. Isn't that wonderful? Thank God. Thank God. Final nation, I don't have time to do every single nation, but Cambodia, our own John and Aaron Mayola. The Mayolas are our version of Where's Waldo. Somewhere in the world, the Mayolas always are. And so they were the first one. They pioneered in Cambodia. In Phnom Penh, Cambodia, they were the first ones from our fellowship to go. Later, a couple from Russia took that. But other couples have been planted, and we're starting to really make impact in Cambodia. And so this is now, the Kenyans are in Siem Reap. This is a giant wooden mallet that they have. This is the idol smasher. Because people who get genuinely saved, what did he tell the people in Thessalonica? You turn to God from idols. And so when people genuinely get saved, the idols have got to be smashed. They have got to be burned. And that massive mallet is the idol smasher. Genuine converts, they do that. And we currently have 7 churches in Cambodia. We thank God for the work that God is doing there. Final photo I want you to see here is, this is just a picture. I'm showing you different photos from my dad's Bible. And here you can see my dad's writing. This is 2017. He was getting very old and shaky. But this spoke to him, "Blessed are ye who sow beside all waters that send forth there the feet of the ox and the ass." And he was speaking about church planting. He says, that is our job. That's what we do in Prescott. That is the vision that we have. That is what we've tried to transmit. And thank God there are other churches all around the world that they are sowing beside all waters. Some of the greatest waters in the earth numerically are in Asia. And we thank God for what he's doing in Asia. Let's praise God together. Let's thank God for his goodness. God, thank you for what you're doing. And thank you that you allow us to be a part of this. And thank God. And I'm very grateful. Please, I'm skipping very fast. I cannot personally name and give photos of every single person, but please recognize there are workers that they paid a great price, especially the first ones in a nation. It's often very difficult on them. I honor every single one of you. If you're watching this, I thank God for every missionary that believed and every pastor that sent, because we are going to impact Asia for Jesus. Thank God. We're going to stop there, and the service will start at 10:30.